Facebook on my pages as well. So
awesome. Awesome. Okay, so it's going to go live, and I think we are now live streaming on Facebook. So I am so excited. It is Sunday night, and I am Franny, Pulse of Shine with Franny, and I have a very important, very special guest with me today, Miss Jennifer McKinley. So give us a hello, Miss Jen.
hi, Franny. I'm so excited and very honored to be here in your community.
Well, I'm super excited because you have a really, really hot topic for us to talk about tonight. And Jen and I, first of all, just kind of introduce a little bit about how we know each other. And you'll notice, guys, she has the most beautiful accent because she is not in the US. And I'll let her go ahead and do the honors of sharing a little bit about her background there. But Jen and I met in a group that we are part of with a friend of ours, friend Ellen. She's our coach. And so as we got to talking and just, hearing about, Jen and I hopped on a call, and I was like, people need to know about this. And, you've got such a great background, with having been at Yale and, being a successful entrepreneur for all these years, and just some of your mindsets and some of the shifts that you've made in your business over the years. I was just wowed and intrigued. And so I knew I had to have you come on. So Jen, why don't you start off by telling us, obviously you're an entrepreneur, but tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and then how you kind of entered that, path, if you will.
Sure. Well, Freddie, yeah, thanks for having me. So, as you said, I'm down here in New Zealand, but I had actually, until the end of last year, I had spent the last few decades up in the United States, really building my career and building my businesses. And so I came to the States to get my master's degree at Yale University, and then went into sort of big business. Worked at the Boston Consulting Group for many years, IBM for many years, so really consulting all over the world with large corporates. But my parents actually were both entrepreneurs, and so it was very much in the blood, and I always kind of knew that I was going to have my own business at some point. And so after I sort of felt like, you know what, I've done my bit in corporate America, I really think it's time for me to start my own business. So I did that about 15 years ago. And, I created a couple of companies actually and sold one of them. And then I've really been focusing for the last 13 years on a high-end skincare treatment line called Core Silver. It has silver in it, which is a natural antibacterial. And it was an interesting path because I was doing pretty well actually. And the brand was growing globally. It sold all around the world in places like Harrods in the UK, Stanley Korshak in Dallas, CO Bigelow in New York. So really, really, sort of boutique places, retailers who have just really fallen in love with the brand. But it was really interesting because I'm a numbers person. Even at Yale, as I was doing my MBA there, I was an accounting TA. So a teacher's assistant in accounting, like I know my numbers. And yet what was interesting, Franny, was as I was growing and growing and growing, I sort of got to the point where I felt like everybody else in the Core Silver ecosystem was making money off the company. And at the end of every month, there was never, after I paid all of my bills, there was never really enough to pay me what I knew that I was actually worth. And so I was starting to really resent my business and regret going down this entrepreneurial path. And it was really interesting because I was starting to really think, do I really want to keep doing this? Or maybe I'm just not a good business person. Like I really started having doubts about that. And, and here was this brand that had grown globally. And yet I was really, really doubting my abilities as a businesswoman. And it was basically because I just wasn't making any money off it for myself. The company was making money. There was not enough for me to actually pay myself what I knew that I was worth. And so I was getting a little resentful and starting to really fall out of love with my business. And then through the podcast, I love podcasts. So through the podcast rabbit hole, I found out about this guy, Mike McKinley, who had written a book called Profit First. And so I was at a trade show in Hong Kong, walking around, listening to him as I was going around the trade show. And it was just so simple and so intuitive that it just made so much sense. So I immediately went and implemented it in my own business. And that was about 4 years ago now. And now I'm just back in love with my business. I'm paying myself what I'm worth. And the company is really, really healthy.
So your core silver was about 13 years ago. It sounds like you had just kind of that serial entrepreneurship, right? You were just kind of selling and things like that. And then this was just about 4 years ago. So you had these businesses. So let me kind of dive into that a little bit, because obviously you were an entrepreneur and you were a successful entrepreneur. But then like what happened where obviously, like you said, it was a success. What was the mindset shift then that allowed you to kind of, draw the line in the sand and say, you know what, like this is working, but I'm not getting paid. Like, how did that happen? And how did you transfer, to that, to changing up kind of your belief system, if you will?
Yeah, so I guess, part of it was I was just growing too quickly. I've bootstrapped the whole thing, so I don't have outside investors. And I just kept thinking, I was listening to the retailers. They're like, what they want? They wanted constant product development. They wanted new products all the time. Every time I would sit down with a beauty editor, and my brand has got a lot of editorial coverage because it is pretty unique and different. But every time I would sit down with a beauty editor, they'd be, sort of like, well, this is great. Now what's next? So everyone was always looking for that growth story, like new products, new geographic markets. And so I was expanding with the idea that I was reinvesting in the business. So the fact that I wasn't taking a salary myself was investing in the business, and, sort of with the idea that at some point this is all going to pay off, and then I'm going to have the big payday and it's all going to be worth it. But the mindset shift was actually, I'm the most important employee in my company. And so I need to make a living from it, because if I don't make a living from it, it's not sustainable. And so by implementing the profit first system, and I forgot to mention in my story, it's been so successful for me that I then became a profit first. I got certification in a profit first, the process about 2 years ago now. And so now I teach other small business owners how to implement it. But for me, it was taking that step back, having a look at true profitability, not, the tax accountant's definition of profitability, but really looking at the cash profitability in my own business, and then seeing how I could sort of, play around to actually start paying myself. And there's a very good system in terms of the profit first implementation that walks you through all of that. And so what I ended up doing was, for the first time, was I actually started paying myself, and it was a teeny tiny amount at the beginning. It literally was like 2% of my revenues went to a salary for me, but then I had a plan, and I just grew, into that. And what was the aha for me in terms of getting to that profitability so that I could pay myself? I was actually shrinking the company. So getting smaller first. Yeah.
Juxtaposition of what we hear, like grow, expand, like you said, new markets and new products. How did you do that? How did you actually shrink then your business? Because obviously too, that's a fear. Like, oh my gosh, if I shrink this, maybe I'm going to not make as much money, right? Like the revenue won't be there. So talk a little bit about that, because that's you kind of dove into a lot of mindset pieces that a lot of people, if you have fears, you contract and you're afraid, and so you don't do those things that maybe feel like they're opposite of what you should be doing.
Yeah. And so basically what I did was I really had a look at, I did the profit assessment in terms of, okay, what should I be paying myself? And in the profit first world, if you're just starting out and your revenues are below, up to 250,000, you should be paying yourself 50% of that. If it's, and then as you grow, so, the next band up to 500,000, it goes down to 35%. The next band it goes down to 20%. But basically, you should be paying yourself first, and then what's left over is what you can then be using on operating expenses. You should be putting aside money for taxes, because your tax liability, that should be a habit, as opposed to an afterthought and then a panic moment, like, oh my gosh, I'm profitable and now I've got this big tax bill and I haven't set aside cash for it. So setting up all of these processes where you're setting aside money for the important things, and then what's left over is what you can spend on operating expenses. So it's really flipping the accounting equation. Accountants get taught, as business owners, we're taught the accounting way, which is sales minus expenses equals profit. But interestingly, the way the human brain works is like, it's Parkinson's law, whatever's available, we're going to use that. So if all of the money, if you just simply flip that equation, sales, revenue minus profit, owners pay, tax liabilities equals expenses. So it's super simple, but in that is its genius.
Well, it is. It's very clever. And I'm wondering, I'm sitting here because I do quarterly taxes with my accountant. We set that up because of like you said, you don't want to get to the end of the year and go, oh my gosh, I made money. And then, now, so, I set that up because I'm such a budget person. So for me, I was like, know that it's taken care of and I know that it's done. Let me ask you a question, because a lot of people who do follow me are budding entrepreneurs. They're new entrepreneurs. What kind of cash flow do you have to have coming in before you can kind of start implementing this model? So if somebody's just making, $1,000 a month right now, just kind of starting off their business, is this something that they can, implement right away? Or do they have to have a certain amount of either gross or net, one way or the other? I guess it would be gross, because then you figure out the net, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Franny, I love this question so much, because this is actually kind of my niche. A lot of the profit first professionals work with, more established companies who may have got in trouble and so need to sort of do a reset. But my niche, the companies that I just absolutely love working with, are the startups. And what we're doing with those startups is, from the very, very first dollar that comes in the door, we've already got the system in place, and so that they're actually, they're starting off their company in a financially responsible, a financially healthy way. So, for example, I worked with a blowout bar up in Washington State, and they came to me. They had read the book. They came to me to set up the system even before they opened their doors. There's another company that I've just finished implementing with. She had been working in DC. She had been running this line of business for a corporation, and they spun it off and she acquired it from them. And so she's stepping into her CEO role for the first time in her life, and was, very confused by all of the accounting. And so we set the system in place, because the beauty of the system also is you don't need to learn or like accounting, because it's all just so simple. Yeah.
About that, because I know you're a numbers person and you've got a Yale degree, a master's from Yale, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I still have to use like my, my calculator on my phone. I'm like, okay, what is that? Like, okay, let me divide that. And what is, believe me. And so with that being said, how much of this, I'm assuming that this program, the Profit First, it kind of has templates, or it has, a system in place, like you said, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So what we do is, we basically teach the concepts, and then I'll work with you and hold your hand as we're setting up the banking system. So we basically set up different bank accounts for different purposes. I mean, it's a little bit like, I don't know about you, but my grandmother used to, when my grandfather would come home with his pay packet, she'd then put it into little envelopes, for different purposes. It's a little bit like that, but with, electronic banking. And so we'll go through that. I'll do the profit assessment for you. For the startups, we actually did that on projections. And then because it's so easy to implement, then as we worked together in those weeks, we just looked at the actual numbers and then made the allocations based on the actual revenue coming in the door. So yeah, and then we also do a lot of mindset work. So for companies who've been going for a while, who were a little bit like me, like, really sort of questioning, why did I start this business in the first place? We also work together on some mindset work, because I think that's like super important.
Well, and I think that, what you bring up is so important, the mindset piece. And I know we talked about that, earlier, like getting paid what you're worth too. Is that part of the conversation that you have with people just in regards to like rates? Like how much are you actually charging? Is that part of the conversation, or is this something, I know you said your niche is kind of working with startups, and knowing that there's a belief system around this. Like I know I've struggled with this, and I put actually in some of the copy today when I was promoting tonight. I have struggled with this because sometimes like I've had people say like, oh, you just outpriced yourself, or wow, that's way higher than what I expected, or things like that. And I've had people saying that. And so then it's caused me to like kind of contract and say, oh, well, maybe I'm not. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like I know other people who are getting paid more than me to do this because I work with those people. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, ugh. So do you do some of the mindset work around that too? Or again, because, you're coming in, like you said, with the startup person, are you helping them establish some of their prices too?
Yeah, exactly. So, part of the beauty of, sort of doing the assessment is it really shines a spotlight on that top line. So what are you pricing your products and services at? What are your margins? And as an example, I'll use myself as an example. That was like a huge aha moment for me in terms of doing the profit assessment on the skincare company, which then caused me to, get rid of some unprofitable products. It caused me to exit out of, Russia and Japan because they were so low margin. So that's kind of how I contracted, because it just, shines that spotlight on, are you charging enough for your products and services, to be able to pay yourself what you're actually worth.
Right. And I think that that's powerful because I know, and a lot of the people who watch, and are kind of part of my ecosystem, if you will, a lot of us are Christians, and there's oftentimes a philosophy that if you're doing it and if it's God's work, and I know that you're, former Catholic, I think,
Yes. Yeah.
oftentimes that there's a mindset towards consumers too. Like, well, I can't believe they're charging that. And I always like a lot of the people that I work with, we talk about the word belief, and the middle of the word is the word lie, right? And then I always say that it's limitations, intimidations, and then excuses that we then believe. And
Yeah.
so what you say is maybe a belief that people have around that money mindset, around that. I love that, your mission is to end or eradicate entrepreneurial poverty. And I think that's super powerful. I read a statistic not too long ago. It said 90% of first-time business owners fail and 90% of second-time business owners succeed. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so powerful. And I think a lot of it is tied into what you're talking about today. One, the mindset piece, like I'm just going to give up because I'm not making any money. Like you said, you were burning out. And then secondly, it's like the belief system they have around that charging. So can you kind of speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, the mindset work around, just us as small business owners, us as entrepreneurs, we're innovating, we're providing, products and services that the world needs. And so you should be rewarded for that, because it's scary. It's so scary going out and working for yourself. And so, you need to have that reward there. And I just like, for example, for me, I am quite a sensitive person. And so being in that CEO role is oftentimes really, really uncomfortable for me. So working on my own belief system is hugely important. Doing my daily mindfulness practice, that's hugely important. The days when I start off where I haven't done that mindfulness work, where I haven't done my meditation or prayer or, you know, whatever you would like to call that practice. And that those days that I don't do that just don't go as well. And then the days when I do that, they just seem to flow. And so working on actually establishing a success formula, what I call a success formula for your morning practice, just to set you up so that you can be successful, so that you can really serve your customers, so that you can be in your zone of genius and use your gifts that, you know, the universe, God has given you. That's, you know, that's such a huge part of it, because it's hard. It's really hard. Resilience is probably one of the toughest, you know, well, it's funny that I said it's the toughest part. Resilience is just so key to being a successful entrepreneur, I believe.
Right. And I think that goes back to, you know, that stat that I read, like the 90% of the second time business owners, like they at that point they've built up that muscle, if you will. You know what I mean? Like they know like that grit, you know, the grittiness that you need towards that. So it definitely, you had mentioned in our initial conversation, you know, I didn't always love what I do. It definitely comes across that you're loving what you're doing. You know, what is kind of your favorite part, if you will, about helping people from, because obviously in your profession, you know, there are people who are working with different entrepreneurs on a continuum. What made you kind of choose to start up, and what is it that kind of like keeps you staying there in that space?
Yeah. So what made me want to work in that area is I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I just love the energy around the startup phase. And I just really wanted to help people not make the same mistakes that I had made. And so that was kind of, you know, where I started in terms of that niche, and where I just love staying in that niche is just seeing people get peace of mind around their finances. Especially for, you know, mostly my clients tend to be women who are sort of in their mid 40s to mid 50s. And it's the first time they've actually been in this CEO role. And so it's helping them step into their power. And one of the pieces of feedback that I get most often is that, you know, working with the system just gives them peace of mind around the numbers. Instead of lying awake at night, just worrying about the numbers, they know every Friday they just make their allocations. I've got a little calculator tool that I give them. They just plug in the one number into the calculator tool. They do their allocations. They go have a glass of wine and they're done.
I was going to say, if it's that mindless, you know, I mean, like you said, when you have a system and you have the processes, I don't know if you know James Clear, but I love him. He wrote Atomic Habits, and he talks so much about, you know, having the system in place. Because once you have the system in place, the day-to-day stuff is not the big deal. It's the long term, right?
Yeah.
I think that's powerful and it's important. I just want to kind of take a few more minutes, if that's okay, just the last 2 minutes. I know you mentioned along the way, you know, this was a mistake, or I started doing this with my business. What would you say is probably the biggest mistake that you made? And then how did you take that lesson learned from that and then implement that, especially as a serial entrepreneur? It's kind of like that ongoing cycle for you. So what would you say?
Yeah.
I know this wasn't a question I prepped you with before, so hopefully it's something you can pull off the top of your head here, girl.
Yeah, no, I would say that the two biggest mistakes that I made were thinking that I could grow my way into profitability instead of just starting as a profitable company right from the get-go. The second thing I think I made a mistake in was listening to too many other people, thinking, well, they've been in the industry longer than I have, and therefore they know what's right for my business. But at the end of the day, the only person who knows what's right for my business is me, because my business gives me the lifestyle that I want. And for me, that's a personal thing. My lifestyle isn't, you know, my lifestyle goals aren't the same as your lifestyle goals, as, you know, my siblings' lifestyle goals. Like, we've all got very personal lifestyle goals. And so working backwards from that, reverse engineering from, okay, well, what do I want from my life? Therefore, what do I want my business to be so that it supports my life instead of the other way around? I had made the mistake of just listening to too many other people. And now that I'm very, very clear on what I want for my life first, and therefore what I want from my business, has just been a game changer for me.
I think that's hugely powerful too as we enter into quarter 4 of a crazy year. I think we could all admit, right? And so I think that that's important, like you said, kind of knowing what you want for your own life and what your own terms and definition of success are. I know
Yeah,
that it might be very different than like for you, and so I think that that's important too. And I'm assuming that that's part of the conversation you would have with clients you work with to help them
it
kind of
is.
that, right?
Yeah, and as always, what we do, we start with a mindset. So I have people do a visualization exercise 2 years from now, and then 7 years from now, and I call it the 2 years from now is kind of the comfort lifestyle, and then the 7 years from now is what I call the hell yeah lifestyle. So it's like yes, and then but then we do the numbers around it. So then we take that lifestyle, we put the numbers to it, and then we reverse engineer to, okay, well, how big does the business need to be to support that? And so,
Starting with the end in mind, right? I can't remember which of there's somebody who is it Steve Ron? I can't remember who Rowan, however you say his name, but somebody always starts to start with the end in mind. Oh, Stephen Covey. He always says
ah,
start. It's just the same thing, like wedding date. Okay, pick the date and then get everything else in order. The marathon, pick the date, get everything else in order. Get all your training. So I think that's.
yeah,
I don't think a single person 5 years ago would have thought that they were going to be right here, right now. So it's good to plan ahead for those kind of things. And I think it's good too to think, like you said, 7 years and then 2 years, and that reverse engineering it backwards is hugely powerful. So that's great. So,
yeah.
but would you have any kind of final, words of wisdom, if you will, for someone who's just starting out or someone who maybe is kind of already into, their past, maybe it's a startup phase, they've got their website or they've got, a few clients in the pipeline, if you will. What would be some things that you would suggest to them just as a fellow entrepreneur? And then, of course, as a profit first professional.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it's not for the faint of heart. And so having structure, having a very, very strong mindset practice, a spiritual practice, really, really helps you, set yourself up for that. It's a marathon, so it sets you up for that long run. And then just having processes in place. I'm kind of a process geek. So really having those systems and those processes in place so that you can be focusing on your zone of genius, whatever that zone of genius is. And then the other thing I would say is I sort of term it hashtag watch your filters. So it's like just be wary of who you listen to. Not everybody gets it. Not everybody understands. Even my partner, who, he's just the most wonderful, wonderful man and super smart. But sometimes, you know what? He doesn't walk in my shoes as a CEO, as an entrepreneur. So, you know what? Sometimes I don't want to hear his advice. So,
Right?
yeah, exactly. So I just say watch your filters. So and a lot of people, I think a lot of people also have aspirations to be an entrepreneur and just never quite make that step. And so they may rain on your parade a little bit as well. So that's why I say just watch your filters and find your community, because you do need support. And you and I are very lucky with the community that we are part of. It's so supportive. The women in there are so smart. So find, because it can be lonely as well. So find that support community so that you can be getting great words of wisdom.
Well, how would people connect with you? I know that you mentioned one is your for silver, and then two is also then with your profit first, and then just other ways for people to connect with you. I'm assuming. Oh, I know you're on Facebook because we're friends, and then
Yeah,
also Instagram, right? And then
that's
also,
right.
and I'll make sure that we drop that below in the notes, so in case anyone wants to connect with you or learn more.
Yeah, so it's The Beauty of Profit First is the name of the company.
And they can find out a little bit about you, right? Because I know that they can actually work with you then one-on-one, right? It wouldn't just be
That's right.
it would be assigned, they can specifically select you.
That's correct. That's correct. So, and because I work with younger companies where their revenues may not be, quite there yet, I do have my prices tend to be a lot lower than a lot of the other profit first professionals out there. That's just a personal choice I've made. I really love working with small startup companies. And I'm down here in New Zealand now with with COVID, with our borders being closed. So it makes it even more affordable for people. So
Lovely thing. I'm assuming because of the price, right? I'm assuming that it changes with the exchange. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is it called the dollar there? What is it called in
It
New
is
Zealand?
the dollar. Yeah, the New Zealand dollar. Yeah.
Sure. And what is the exchange going these days?
I think one New Zealand dollar is about 65 cents US at the moment.
That's a pretty good conversion then.
Yeah, yeah.
For us, not for you. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Well, Jen, thank you. I mean, of course, I'm so glad that I got the chance to chat with you. I learned more about, your business overall, and then just more about you. And that always makes me excited too. I know you've got a lot of information. I'm going to go ahead and put that beauty of profit first, sorry, in the links below so people can connect with you. And I was looking to see, I was looking at my phone a couple of times only because I wanted to see if there were any comments. And so
Yeah,
there were no questions. And so I should have framed that in the very beginning to have asked questions. We did get a few hellos and waves. So that's a good sign. So people were,
right.
so, but I will definitely be in connection, in contact with you. I'll drop all your links and I'll share this and amplify this on both, on all the channels, YouTube, Facebook,
Lovely.
yeah, everything. So thank you so much for joining in and have a great night and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thanks, Franny.
Yeah.